Okay. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our final workshop in this series. This workshop, I'm like trying to think in my head. This workshop specifically is about reciting on a big stage for poetry out loud, kind of aiming where you need to think about for state and maybe even nationals. And so once again, I have brought with me Mandie Hines. Mandie will be leading this workshop and talking you through all of the great tactics and maybe like a little secret that she might have to help you recite at state poetry out loud for Wyoming. So Mandie, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amara. I am so excited to be able to talk to you about this. We are less than a week away from the finals, and I don't know, if you haven't been there, you are going to love it. I love this event so much. Amara and I were just talking a little bit earlier about how much I love poetry out loud. So I'm so excited for you guys to come and participate in it. I'm going to cover a couple of things that I discussed in the previous workshop, but from the standpoint knowing that you only have a week left. So these are things that I still want you to focus on, or if you haven't paid attention to these or you didn't get a chance to listen to the last workshop, these are things that will hopefully help you within the next week. So the first is about recitation, and I'm going to point out again how important accuracy is. It's 25% of your score, and you might think, oh, that's not that big of a deal. The performance is such a big score, but I can tell you that if you nail accuracy, that could be what wins state. That's how important it is. If you haven't gotten your poems down in your bones yet, you need to do that. You have to internalize the poem, let it be a part of you, and you do this by finding a connection to the poem. Rehearse your poems. I know that you all have been rehearsing your poems. Don't let up on that rehearsing, and in fact, intensify it a little bit, because this is one of the things that's really going to help you with your nerves and to do that thing that I tell you about internalizing the poems. So just rehearse them over and over again. Recite them for your friends, your family, in front of a mirror, and to your pets. And the reason I say in front of a mirror is because it's another place. Sometimes that's where you start, is rehearsing it by yourself in front of a mirror, so you get comfortable making some eye contact. And then one thing that can help you in kind of getting an idea of how you're doing in performing your poems is to record them and then listen to them back. Check your printed copy of the poem for any skipped words or words that you accidentally added to the poem, and then observe, are you conveying the feelings and ideas that you intended, and did you get the pacing right? And then record it again, making some adjustments from your notes, and then let the recording sit for 30 minutes, and then come back and focus on listening. Are there words that got lost that bump into the next word? And work on creating space and making sure every single word is heard. And that is so important for poetry. It's so important for your accuracy, and it's so important for the experience of the audience. Then also pay attention in the recording to what is your posture like, and look for fidgeting, because these are things that you can smooth out within the next week just by practicing and being aware, because when we fidget, we often aren't aware that we're doing that. It's just something that we do because we're nervous or we're concentrating on the next words. And here's another reason that's so important to practice in front of some friends or family within the next week. Practicing in front of an audience helps you learn how others react to your poems. They might laugh, they might gasp. Poetry can cause audible reactions from the audience, which is so cool. But you want to anticipate those reactions. And so practicing in front of an audience will inform you on how to change your pacing, where you need to add a pause or make a pause longer than you anticipated, And the power of performance is so different in person with somebody else. The flow of energy between a spoken word artist and the audience is almost tangible. So you want to kind of feel what that is like before you get in front of a bigger audience. And some of you might not have had much opportunity to be in front of an audience, even going through your district competition. So now let's hit performance. One of the things that I remember as judging Poetry Out Loud before that I wish students knew was that the judges are there for you. They want you to do well. And even though they have to score you, they're rooting for you. They really want you to do well. And they're sympathetic and they know that you're nervous. So just breathe. And if you happen to stumble, just take a breath and reground and keep going, because they will wait as long as you need them to wait. Don't feel like you have to get off the stage, just keep going. And then to help ground you, I want to talk about posture, which I've talked about before, but I want to readdress it because it is the first thing that you do when you get on stage. And it is the first impact you make before you even say a word. And presence is something that you're judged on, and you can do some little tricks to have a presence on stage before you are even reciting your poem. So one of the things that I want you to kind of visualize, I just have these keys to help you think about it. So you're thinking about that instead of your nerves. So pretend there's a string on the top of your head and you're just pulling your head up, right? So you're tall, and then ground your feet through the ground, like you're wanting to root into the ground. So have your feet kind of shoulder width apart, and then you're going to spread your shoulders. One of the things that we just tend to do when we're nervous is we pull our shoulders in and we shrink. We try to take up less space. So you want to have like a whole box area that you're standing tall, you feel comfortable in the space, and you're taking up space. And that in itself will make you appear confident. And it kind of does this mind trick that when you're taking up the space and you're making your body have this confident posture, it starts thinking that, oh yeah, I feel comfortable and I'm confident in this space. So it serves two purposes. One, to relax and calm you and make you feel grounded in the space. And two, it projects confidence to the judges and the audience. Take a moment to breathe in and focus on the connection that you have with that poem. Think just in that moment, what is the poem and what are you going to project? And then breathe out your nerves, because your performance is not about you. It's not about your nerves. It's just about the poem. So the next thing, when you start reciting, you want to read or recite to the audience. You're not reading it at the audience. There is a connection. So even though you're doing the verbal portion, there is an interaction between you and the audience. So it's not like you're giving them a lecture and they're not interested. It's a two-way thing. And that's the part the audience plays, is kind of that audible reactions that they have sometimes, which if you get to hear that, it is so cool. But that is something that shows you that the audience is engaged. So you first, to recite to an audience instead of at them, you first engage with your poem. Your performance should be so full-bodied that it impacts you first. And this is why poem selection is so important. Learn when to be hard and when to be soft, and then do that on the stage. Emotions help make your piece dynamic, and poems are usually more conversational than people realize, and should be read more like normal language than with pausing at the end of a line. So it's like you're telling a story. You're an actor or an actress, and you are performing this piece for the enjoyment of your audience. Over the next week, spend time with your poems. Know the feeling and the purpose of the poem so well that you won't forget it, even if you are nervous on stage. Know your why for choosing the poems. Why? Why did you choose these poems out of over 1,000 poems that you could have picked? Why did you pick these? Why did they speak to you? Why did you think that these were important enough to perform? Nerves before and during a performance. You have to get out of your own way. Your nerves, in other words, you are getting in the way of what the performance is supposed to be about, the poem. So if you do some of the things that I've already discussed, like the practicing, the rehearsing in front of an audience, these are all things that will help you combat those nerves. And regarding emotion of a poem, one of the things that you do is you practice these poems to get control of those emotions, but some poems you have to be deliberate about controlling your emotions and not let them overtake you. You have to brace yourself, let the emotion show, but not spill over. And so practicing, the more you practice, the more control you have over your poem. If you can't control your emotions in private, you won't be able to control them in front of an audience. And practicing it in front of an audience, I may have talked about this previously, but there's a different type of vulnerability when you perform in front of an audience, and emotions can catch you off guard. You can have a connection to that poem or that feeling that you didn't anticipate or you didn't have in your rehearsals before. So just try to practice it and get in control over those. And if you lose control, just take a breath. Take a breath, swallow, and then when you've got it under control, continue on. When you go out on stage, you got to put it all out there. That is your job, to put everything that you have out on the stage. There's nothing gained by withholding something from your performance. And here's some hopefully encouraging information about performing in front of a large audience. While the anticipation of performing on a big stage can be greater than when you just have a few people, many poets actually prefer a larger audience. And let me tell you why that is, because oftentimes you're on a stage and sometimes there's house lights. So they dim the house lights and then your audience kind of just disappears. And you know they're out there, but you're not having to make that eye contact with anybody. You just get to gaze out there and picture, your favorite people, maybe your family, your friends, somebody, you trust and that you really connect with. Just imagine that they're who you're performing for, and they might actually be people who are in the audience there to support you. And even if there is more light, there are also more faces, which might sound alarming, but it really is not, because when there's just a couple people in the audience, there are only a few faces, a few people who you can make eye contact with, and that can be alarming. People, let me just warn you, people have the weirdest resting faces when they are listening intently to something. They can look like they're bored. They can be looking like they're not even paying attention. They're looking off to somewhere else. But for some reason, that is something that people do. They're not really paying attention to what they're looking at. They're actually focusing more on what they're listening to. So it may look like, nobody's paying attention, nobody's listening. I've even had people who look like they're really angry, but I think it's just that they were concentrating. So from experience, where I have performed and thought people hated it, and then had such a rush of emotion when people approached me afterwards with how moved they were, how they were so thankful that I shared, my pieces. I have learned that you cannot trust people's facial expressions when you're performing. Sometimes you can. Sometimes you can tell that they're moved, that they're emotional, but that's another thing, is sometimes they're moved emotionally And catching their eye of somebody who's emotional can kind of trigger that emotion in you where you thought you had it in control, but just the connection with somebody who's also moved by what you're saying can throw you in. It can make you lose control of your poem. And one trick is you can always look over the heads of a large audience. Just look right above them, and the audience feels like you're engaged with them just the same as if you were looking them directly in their eyes. So I know it can be intimidating with a larger audience, but it's actually oddly comforting. So just find hope and courage in knowing that. Some things to pay attention to: your hard stops. And that's a sudden pause in the poem for effect, often after the poem has built momentum and speed, and it gives your audience time to catch their breath and absorb what they've just heard. It's important that the audience hears every word. I've said this several times, but it's so important. So you need to enunciate. And when you build momentum and the pace quickens, you want to make sure the audience still hears the words, because it's just our tongues get lazy. We're so used to communicating with our friends and family. We cut off words. We say, a lot of times in speech, when you say, oh, I'm going to go see them in the morning, a lot of people drop off the TH. They say, oh, I'm going to go see them in the morning. It's just a natural rhythm of our speech, but you have to be careful with your poetry that you don't fall into those pitfalls. When there's contemplation in the poem, reflect that in your performance. And when I say that, I just mean that you are, in your delivery, you want to show what's going on in that poem. And contemplation is a really easy one to point out on how to do that. Gestures and facial expressions, as a guideline, 3 to 5 gestures per poem, less for shorter poems. It's not a hard rule, but make sure that any gestures you are using convey meaning of the poem to the audience. Do not let your facial expressions or your gestures distract from the poem. And that includes, you can't smile through a poem that's sad, and you can't frown through a poem that's, about love. So just think about those. Breathing is so important. And I will probably stress this every time because it helps with pacing. It helps add emotion. When you pause, take a longer breath. Try to be careful not to take those sharp, audible breaths because they're a distraction, but it also, breathing helps you calm down. It helps reset for a second. So it does a lot for you as the performer, but it also does a lot for the audience. Don't be afraid of that space and silence. People get uncomfortable when they know people are looking at them and there's just that silence, and it can cause you to rush. It can cause you to shorten a pause that you know needs to be there. And that breathing, that just gives you something to do while you are allowing for that pause. Endings of poems. Poems are tricky because they're not like a story. Sometimes the audience can't always tell when a poem has ended. So you want to think about how your poem winds down. What are you giving the audience for cues that the poem is coming to an end? And the thank you at the end of the performance. I don't know if your teachers, your mentors, whoever have told you not to do that. Here's my advice. Don't do it. Don't add a thank you at the end, although that is a quick way to tell everybody that I'm done and you can applaud as now, but just don't do it. And while it may not technically detract from your score, there's so many reasons not to say thank you. I have watched poets recite heartbreaking, moving pieces and then followed up with a chipper thank you. And it is so jarring for the audience and the judge. The silence is a powerful tool. It's the moment that the poem lingers on the air and people are still engaged with you and are processing the words that they just heard and watched. So like I said, just a little bit earlier, don't be afraid of silence. When you're finished with your poem, take a moment to take a breath, linger, and then leave the stage. Up until now, as you've been practicing and performing, you've probably considered the poem a lot from your perspective, from how you're viewing it, how it feels to you to recite it. In this last stretch, I really want you to focus on the audience's experience, how they'll receive each poem. And this includes paying extra attention to pacing so they can hear every word, deliberate pauses so they can absorb and process what you've said, and articulating each word so nothing is missed. A pause can also indicate, hey, pay attention to this next part. It's not just we talked about the hard stop where it's kind of like dropping off a cliff. Like, I just said something really impactful, and just process that. It can also say, hey, I'm about to say something important, so pay attention. Make sure that the pauses feel and appear deliberate and not like you've just forgotten your line. Pauses, changes in tone, hitting words hard or soft, these variations are all used to keep the audience engaged. Sometimes the mind wanders. Even if you're intending to pay attention to every word of poetry, it just is natural for your mind to wander. Maybe it's something in the poem even that struck a memory. So you're wanting to rehook the audience at every chance you get. And that happens with these shifts in your performance, and it will help recapture the attention of your audience. Now, if you're comfortable with public speaking, don't be overconfident. I've listened to so many poets who are comfortable with public speaking, and then they rush through their poems and they recite or read them in a monotone. It's very interesting because I always think that people who are comfortable with public speaking will be really dynamic in their talk or their performance or whatever, but it kind of gives them this confidence that they don't have to worry about it. But let me just say, yes, worry, not worry about it, but pay attention that you're hitting all these points that I've talked about. And if you're nervous about public speaking, there's a tendency to hold your words in close, to speak softly. It's almost as if the words die right in front of your face. They just fall off. So make sure that you're projecting your words and not yelling. Yelling causes this sharp thing in the microphone when it picks it up. Projecting is pushing from the diaphragm and pushing the words out to your audience. Regardless of whether you're comfortable with public speaking or not, everyone is truly on an even playing field. So don't feel like anybody has an advantage over you. And I want you to know, I just think this is so important. In your moment of performing, the audience is there just for you, to hear you, to support you, to encourage you. It doesn't matter how many other people are there to compete. When you're on stage, their attention is there just for you. And they have a single purpose, to hear you perform. And they have a deep desire to be engaged in the poem you've carefully selected and to understand it. And that's what you're there to do. So I hope that you guys have a great time. I hope these tips help you, and you'll do great. It's such an awesome event. And Amara, was there anything I missed or anything you want me to touch on?
I don't think so. I think you nailed it. Yeah, I would just want to remind all the contestants that you will have a prompter in the room that will be in the front seat. So if you do need to take a second and have somebody remind you where you are in the poem, that is also something, a tool there for you to use. Like Mandie said, just take a deep breath, be prepared, just give it your all. We're so excited for everybody to come and perform for us. And yeah, as Mandie said, we're there for you. We're there to support you we want you to succeed. We want you to have a good time. So Mandie, thank you so much for all of your tips and tricks. I think they're going to be super helpful for everybody. And if you all have any questions, feel free to reach out to Mandie and I. We'd be happy to answer them or work through stuff with you. Mandie will also be with us at Poetry Out Loud. So, and Poetry Ourselves as well. So feel free to connect with her and talk to her about what it's like to be a poet. So thank you so much, Mandie. And
Absolutely.
We will talk to you all later.